Victoria Sterling never wanted to go on that blind date, but her assistant, Rebecca, had begged, pleaded, and practically scheduled it herself until Victoria finally said yes, just to end the argument. At 31, Victoria ran Sterling Technologies. With the same iron will that had carried her through 2 relentless years of rehabilitation after the car crash that changed everything. The accident had stolen her ability to walk, but not her brilliance, her discipline, or her fire. What it had taken from her, though, was trust. Trust that people could see her before they saw the wheelchair. Over time, she had built walls, high ones, around her heart. The few who tried to break through were usually stopped by polite distance and a cool, professional smile. Rebecca, however, refused to give up. "You need to live again, Victoria," she'd said one morning, sliding a reservation slip across her desk like it was a business deal. "His name's James Morrison, lawyer, loves art, Bach, and doesn't own a cat. Go." And so, on Friday night, Victoria arrived at Meridian, one of downtown's most elegant restaurants. She'd called ahead to make sure everything was accessible. She didn't leave those details to chance anymore. Rolling into the softly lit dining room, she positioned herself at the corner table, straightened her blazer, and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Her phone buzzed. "Sorry, something came up. Rain check?" Victoria stared at the message. The words blurred for a second, and she blinked hard. She'd known this might happen, knew the risk the moment he saw her, but still, it stung. The disappointment was sharper because she had hoped, just a little, that maybe this time would be different. She turned to the waiter and managed a composed smile. "Change of plans," she said. "Just the check for my water, please." Before the waiter could reply, a voice spoke gently from behind her. "Excuse me? Are you Victoria Sterling?" She looked up, startled. Standing there was a man about her age, dark hair, kind eyes, wearing jeans and a button-down that didn't belong in a place like Meridian. He looked nervous, but sincere. The man didn't seem intrusive, just genuinely concerned. "I'm David Chen," he said, his voice warm but hesitant. "I couldn't help overhearing. When I heard your name, I thought, you might be the woman my sister Emma's been trying to set me up with. She told me you'd be here tonight." Victoria blinked, the confusion momentarily pushing aside her embarrassment. "Your sister?" David gave a sheepish smile. "Emma Chen. She works in your marketing department. She's been talking my ear off for weeks about her amazing, brilliant boss. I kept telling her she was wasting her time, because, well..." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm a mechanic. I didn't think someone like you would want dinner with someone like me." The realization clicked instantly. Rebecca had set her up with a lawyer, while Emma had set her brother up with her. 2 different dates, 1 restaurant, and 1 very awkward coincidence. "So, you're not James Morrison?" Victoria said slowly. David chuckled. "And you weren't expecting a guy who smells faintly of motor oil?" His smile was self-deprecating but kind. "I totally understand if this isn't what you had in mind for your evening." Victoria studied him for a moment, the gentle humor in his voice, the easy honesty in his eyes. There was no pity there, no awkwardness, none of the usual shifting glances toward her wheelchair. Just sincerity. She surprised herself by smiling. "Actually," she said softly, "this might be the most interesting thing that's happened to me in months. Would you like to join me for dinner?" David's relief was visible, his grin genuine. "I'd be honored. But full disclosure, I don't really do fancy restaurants. I was planning on grabbing pizza down the street." Victoria laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks. That sounds perfect. Let's go before this place charges us for breathing. Minutes later, they were seated in a cozy booth at a small pizza shop, warm light reflecting off checkered tabletops. Over shared slices and casual conversation, Victoria realized just how different David was from the men she usually met in boardrooms and business galas. He ran a small auto repair shop, specializing in restoring classic cars, something he spoke about with passion, not pretense. He'd put himself through technical school, built his business from scratch, and every word he said carried quiet pride, not arrogance. And most striking of all, he didn't treat her wheelchair like it defined her. To David, it was just another detail, no more significant than her blonde hair or the silver bracelet she wore. He asked about her work, her ideas, her dreams, not her limitations. David spoke with an easy warmth that made every story feel alive. He told her about restoring a 1967 Mustang for a retired pilot, about late nights spent fixing engines that refused to cooperate, and about the satisfaction of bringing old machines back to life. Somehow, in the middle of talk about grease and gears, Victoria realized he was making her feel like the most fascinating person in the room. When David mentioned that he'd remodeled part of his garage to make it wheelchair accessible for one of his customers, something inside Victoria softened. He hadn't done it for attention or praise. It was simply who he was. He understood inclusion not as a theory, but as something practical, something human. Dinner melted into hours. They found themselves laughing about classic films, debating, travel destinations, and discovering an almost uncanny similarity in humor. The connection felt effortless, like two people who had been circling each other for years without knowing it. When David walked her to her car, the air between them carried that quiet spark of something beginning. As Victoria transferred from her wheelchair to the driver's seat, David hesitated before speaking. "I hope this doesn't sound too forward," he said, his tone light but uncertain. "But would you like to have dinner again tomorrow night? Maybe somewhere I can actually afford to pick up the bill?" Victoria turned to him, her lips curving into a smile that felt new, unguarded. "You know what? Why don't you cook for me instead? I'll bring dessert and wine." David's grin broke wide open, lighting up his whole face. "Deal. And just so you know, Emma's going to be insufferably proud of herself." What started that night grew into something Victoria hadn't dared to imagine. Their relationship unfolded naturally, steady, genuine, real. David was thoughtful and intelligent, never intimidated by her success. His straightforward honesty challenged her guarded nature, while his humility reminded her what authenticity looked like outside of boardrooms and balance sheets. In return, Victoria's business sense helped him grow his small shop, giving him confidence to expand what he'd built from nothing. They learned from each other, leaned on each other. Most importantly, David never treated her wheelchair like an obstacle to navigate or a symbol to ignore. It was simply a part of her world, and he moved within it as if he'd always belonged there. He made space without making a fuss, offered help without pity. One evening, as they laughed about how strange fate could be, Victoria finally told him about the blind date that had stood her up, the text that had nearly ruined her night. David chuckled, shaking his head. "So James Morrison's rudeness was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. His loss was definitely our gain," David said, his voice soft with amusement as they sat together on Victoria's rooftop. garden, the city lights glittering far below like scattered stars. Victoria leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the quiet peace between them. The rooftop had once been her private escape, a place where she could think without being stared at. Now it had become their sanctuary. The gentle weight of David's arm around her felt natural, grounding. It still amazed her how, with him, affection felt easy. He didn't see her as fragile. He saw her as desirable, as strong, as a woman worth holding close. 18 months later, under a canopy of flowers and laughter, they were married. The ceremony wasn't about perfection. It was about them. A story of coincidence, courage, and love that had rewritten both their lives. Victoria's business success helped David transform his small garage into something extraordinary. A training center where young mechanics learned to design accessible vehicles and modifications for people with disabilities. In turn, David's grounded, unpretentious wisdom reminded Victoria that success wasn't only measured in profits or power. The most meaningful victories were the personal ones, the quiet, shared moments that made life feel full. At the wedding reception, Emma raised her glass, grinning. "To my most successful matchmaking yet," she declared proudly, while Rebecca laughed, admitting her blind date plan had been a total disaster, one that had somehow led to the best outcome imaginable. Years later, when Victoria spoke at leadership conferences about resilience and inclusion, she often told this story, not as a romantic anecdote, but as a reminder. Some of life's most beautiful connections, she would say, happen when our original plans fall apart. Sometimes what looks like rejection is just life redirecting us towards something better, towards someone who sees our worth exactly as we are. Her audience always went silent then, the truth of it settling deep, because sometimes the most healing love stories don't start with perfect timing or flawless matches. They begin with unexpected kindness. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us love often finds us right when we stop searching for it.